You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, a show that uncovers what's fact, what's fake, and what's fun in the crazy world of pseudo-archaeology. Hello and welcome to the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, episode 158. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and tonight, my trip to Sedona, Arizona. I got new-aged. All right, welcome back. So I'm recording my episodes early right now, which is really weird for me because I guess the APN people, you know, Rachel and Chris, they like want to have like a vacation or something. And I'm like, what? No, you just do my stuff whenever I need, you know? But they don't. They're like, oh, you better record this early or we're not going to get to it. So, you know, by the time you hear this, the planet could have been hit by an asteroid, nuclear annihilation, locusts. You know, it could be a totally different world. So I'm just here to say whoever and whatever overlords are currently taking over this planet that, well, I'm here for you and I bow down before you. With that said, I just got off of a live stream on YouTube, not by me, but actually by Flint Dibble. And he had Tristan Boyle on. Tristan Boyle is one of the top executives at the Archaeological Podcast Network. And anyway, I had a really good time. I was in the chat, you know, just, you know what I would be like in the chat, you know, having a little fun, people's expense, mostly my own. But they were talking about your general sort of reaching out to archaeology. More archaeologists should reach out to the general public. You guys know what I mean. And they had a lot of good points. You know, at the end of the day, it's just more archaeologists should do this thing that I'm doing, what Flint's doing, what Tristan's doing. More archaeologists need to do this, period. And don't be chicken. Just do it. Content is king. You just make as much as you can. It's straight up a numbers game, my friends. The more good, real archaeological content that's out there, the better, period. Stop being a chicken. So with that said, again, it was just, you know, it's funny. Sometimes doing this kind of stuff, it can be lonely. And what I mean by that is sometimes you just feel like nobody else does this, or you know that other people do, but they're kind of few and far between. So sometimes it's nice for me just to listen to somebody who's doing similar things like Flint or like Tristan and just hear them talk. Because I'm like, oh, yeah, I get what they mean. It makes you feel like you're a part of a community when a lot of times, you know, recording stuff like this, you're doing it alone. I mean, I'm sitting here in my office at Moore Park College, got my little microphone on, and I am by myself, recording this. And funnily enough, even when you're recording a show, like when I'm on the CRM Archaeology Podcast, where it's a group discussion, you're still recording alone. You're still in a room alone. And actually, specifically, you try and be the most alone for sound reasons, right? So you're usually cut off wherever you can be cut off, just sort of talking archaeology. And there is a loneliness factor. So it is nice to sort of connect with other humans talking about this kind of stuff. Which brings me to my theme of the day. And this is another one that I've been thinking about a long time in terms of like, how can I talk about this? And that is my trip to Sedona, Arizona. And this was a long time ago. I took this trip in 2006. I believe it was summer, but it was my wife and I went. I think we had just recently gotten married and we just went on this like chill trip, right? We flew out there and we're from the LA area, right? So the flight is like not that bad. It's just over to Arizona. And we were only there, I don't know, like 5 days or something like that. It was like one of those low impact trips. You know what I mean? And I mean that in a very positive sense, where it's just like, you just get some tickets, you just find a place to stay, you just go for a few days, you just check it out. You got like no real rhyme or reason for doing it. And you just kind of let the world happen while you're there. And then you come home. And overall, I do have to say we had a good time, but it was interesting and it was odd for me because I had heard that Sedona was sort of this new age mecca, but I didn't think about it that much. You know, I just was like, oh yeah, but getting there, man, you just get, it's just like a tsunami of new age crystal gazing type of ideology just washes over you when you get there. Barring all the new age stuff, which is what we're going to get into, Sedona as a location is really pretty. It's got that kind of red rock vibe to it. Very just awesome geology, you know, just really great place to just look around, to just look out to the horizon. It's just nice. You know, it's got those sort of mesas that you see, that very cliche, again, in the best possible sense, desert, reddish geological vibe. So it is a nice place to be, no matter who you are, new age or not. And as soon as we got there, though, and we got our place to stay, which I remember our hotel was not very great. I remember it was kind of dumpy. But, you know, we just left our stuff in there. We didn't stay in the hotel very long. But just walking around, I remember one of the first things I noticed was that there were maps everywhere to vortexes, right? And I got it in the basic sense. Okay, I know what a vortex is. It's sort of like this central location that you go to that something's there. But there were these maps, and wherever there was a vortex on the map, there was this little swirl, right? So it was a map full of swirls, and this is where you're supposed to go. And of course, the vortexes were always the prettiest kind of scenic outlooks. It's like if this was anywhere else, wherever the scenic outlook is, oh, that's the vortex. And so since this was one of my main memories of Sedona, the vortex maps that were just everywhere, you could just pick them up. They were like free. I Googled like, what is a vortex? And it immediately came up to, I think the website is like a travel website. Oh yeah, it's like visitsedona.com. And I'm like, what is a vortex? And on their website, they're like, well, what is a vortex? These are swirling centers of energy that are conducive to healing, meditation, and self-exploration. These are places where the earth seems to especially alive with energy. Many people feel inspired, recharged, or uplifted after visiting a vortex. So that's the quote right from the what is it, travel? So yeah, visitsedona.com website, whatever. But again, is there any scientific background to this? Is there any reason scientifically to call one place a vortex versus another? Man, I hate saying this. Of course not, you know, and I wish there was. I wish I had something for you, you know, but of course there's not. And, you know, where did these originally begin? Again, they're at the pretty places, and any of us have been to a pretty place before. And when you get there, you do have that moment of awe, right? And that's great. You have it anywhere. If you have half a heart and half a mind, you have that feeling of awe. Maybe you go to Yosemite and you see El Capitan for the first time. I still remember my feeling of awe seeing that. I was like 10 or something the first time we ever went to Yosemite. And I remember seeing El Capitan. And when you see it, you're just like, wow, that is just so big. Whoa. You know, and yes, those ideas are very simple in your head, but it has this very deep meaning to it. And so what, in this case, Sedona has done is it's tried to monetize that, right? By going, oh, no, this isn't just you having a transcendent experience that you would just have anyway as a human. No, this is a vortex. No, this is a special place. Don't you feel it? So when you go to Sedona, you'll have people in all the nice outlook spots sitting around like meditating and stuff. And I got nothing against meditation, but like I want to stand there and like have my own moment. So go meditate somewhere else, man. You know what I mean? It's like they're crowding up the areas just with their meditative stance. As we spent our day and our several days in Sedona, I remember thinking the downtown was fun to walk around. We had, your various lunches and dinners that were nice, just chilling out. The temperature when it's not too hot is it's just a nice place to walk around. And again, it was very relaxed and fun. One of the worst things I saw, though, was, so of course, with the new age vibe, you have all kinds of kind of trinket shops, I would say, in Sedona, where every other shop is like, they're selling crystals and, maps to wherever and pieces of whatever religious pseudo iconography that are there, right? And because center of new aginess, it attracts more of the same. But at one of these places, they had what definitely were real archaeological artifacts, and they were broken like pottery and that kind of stuff, potsherds, which is, of course, extremely unethical. So yeah, you're supposed to be so new agey and open to all and thoughtful in your meditation, but you'll rip off an archaeological site for your own needs, self-centered. But the worst thing, like we as archaeologists, we see broken pieces of pottery and stuff for sale, and you just go, oh crap, you can't catch them all. But I remember also seeing for sale some very dirty looking baby booties. And the only way likely to get something like that would be to loot like the grave of a child or something like this, and I thought that was just really, really foul to see something like that. And just to see that nobody, they're just there to sell, but it's for spirituality. Really? So you grave robbed a grave of a child, and then and this is likely a native child, and you're selling it. Yeah, you're so ethical. Anyway, that really brought me down, but I thought I'd start with the worst part. So hey, there's only upward from here. When we get back, some real archaeology that's interesting that I saw in the Sedona area before, of course, we take it all down again and talk about the new age stuff. Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudo Archaeology Podcast, episode 158. And I have been talking about my travels in Sedona, Arizona. And for this piece right here, I thought I would talk a little about the actual real archaeological sites I saw when I wasn't at vortices and buying crystals. So luckily for us, there are some really great archaeological sites that you can visit that are vaguely local to Sedona. Is it in a half an hour away? Is it 50 minutes? This kind of thing. An easy day trip, even like a half day trip. And there's three that I thought I would really touch on in no particular order. The first one is the site of Wupatki. Wupatki is great. Now, Wupatki is in this general vicinity. It's not too terribly far away from Sunset Crater. So Sunset Crater is there because it erupted in 1065 AD. So the area very volcanic, which again just adds more awesomeness to the geology of this area. And the culture that was in that vicinity for the last at least 1,300 years, something like this. This area is generally labeled as the Sinagua culture. Now, what did they originally call themselves? Obviously not the Sinagua, because that just means without water in Spanish. But the more modern cultures like the Hopi and these kinds of peoples would be the modern ancestors of people who lived in this area. But if you look on a map of kind of archaeological cultures, this one would go under what we would call Sinagua. And when you look at the site of Wupatki, it has kind of what we generally think of as all the Southwest stuff. You know, when you think of the sort of dwellings, if you think of like Chaco Canyon, it's Chaco Canyon-esque in terms of above ground structures built kind of with stone, with the various rooms, right, and the walls and all that kind of good stuff. The really nice stonework where how these structures are built. Multiple rooms. You can walk through there, and there's like really well made metates. Those are the grinding stones for tortillas, right? Just like sitting on the floor. Because of that, of course, this would have been a people who grew corn, as so many people did in this region. But there were a handful of things actually at the site beyond just the structures that I thought were really interesting. The first one was this thing they called the blowhole. And what it is exactly what you think, although it's not with water. It's a hole in the ground, a little hole, you know, but let's say it's like, I don't know, 4 feet across or something like that. And they've kind of built over a little stone box almost above it, but there's still kind of a square hole where the air comes out, and it's cool air that blows out from there, from underground, which is really great. Because if you're living in a desert area, this idea of basically air conditioning is really awesome. So, man, that must have been a pretty crowded place to sit, you know, 1,000 years ago if it's a super hot summer day. This natural spot where cool air just comes out of the ground. Really, really great. Really neat stuff. In the area, they also have a kiva. And a kiva are those circular below ground structures that you find in the Southwest. And kivas are a classic kind of ritual location. And, you know, if you Google kivas or look for kivas, a place like Chaco Canyon has multiple kivas. And there's multiple ways we kind of describe kivas and talk about them in terms of the ritual connection to the people who lived in this area. Sometimes we talk about them as, since they're built below ground, you can just think of a large circular hole, basically, that's lined with bricks, and it would have likely had some sort of ceiling above it. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But in terms of its ritual structuralness, it might harken back to the earlier phases of these cultures where they often had only below ground structures. The above ground structures come later. So, you know, part of the kiva's meaning might also harken back to kind of the ancients and this kind of good stuff. So this kiva, it to me is very, very typical in terms of how kivas feel. But they have another thing at Wupatki that I thought was really interesting, and one of the main reasons I want to go check it out. They have a ball court, a quote unquote ball court. Now, we can definitely tell that the ancient Maya, the corn, obviously, which is native to the Maya world, right? To southern Mexico and Guatemala and Belize, corn had been traded up. That's how you have corn in the American Southwest, is because it was traded up, you know, 1,500 years ago or so. And then planted by the people of this area. Don't think of it as an ancient Maya person like ran up here and dropped corn down. This is something that's going to be traded up. And we know that obviously for sure, 100%. But often when you trade up something like corn or technology or this kind of stuff, belief systems also trade with them. And so we do have good evidence of what you would call Mesoamerican ball courts. Like when you think of the Maya ball game, there's tons of ball courts in the Maya world, but we have some in the southwestern U.S. too. The most famous one is at Snaketown, which I have not visited, but Wupatki is another place that has one. And so I was really excited to see this because I know ball courts, man. I've been to dozens of ball courts in Mesoamerica, and I'm like, okay, how is this going to compare? Is it the same? Am I going to get the ball court vibe? Speaking of new age, I mean, you know, how does it feel, man? And I got to tell you guys, checking out the ball court for myself it didn't feel that ball courty. I'm not here to say there isn't a Maya like influence there, but it really felt like kind of half ball court, half kiva. And that's almost the way it's structured. So while a classic Maya ball court is very straight, right? Just think of two long, low pyramids right next to each other, right? It just goes straight up and down. You can think of it almost as a mini soccer field or something like that with two low pyramids on either side. At Wupaki, they're like C-shaped. They're curved. So you have kind of one C on one side and one C on the other side, if that makes sense, kind of curving together. And then you have an opening, a little opening on either end. It's almost like a C and then the mirror of a C almost come together and have a little like walkway on either side. So it's generally shaped like a ball court. And I can see how it's definitely not just a regular kiva, but to me, it really is a mix. Maybe a ball court as seen through the eyes of the Sinagua people, right? So my point being, it felt much more Sinagua than it did Maya. You know, it's like 60-40 Sinagua, right? And so I was really surprised by that. I was expecting a much more Maya vibe, and it was less. So cool site though. You know, again, most of the stuff there is going to be from like a post eruption of post 1065 AD. So it's, you know, is this stuff 600 years old? Is it a lot of stuff there is happening in the early 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, you know, that kind of stuff. But a fantastic site to visit to really give you that feeling of that sort of Chaco feeling, even though it's the Sinagua people. So Wupaki, killer site. The second place we went was Montezuma's Castle, which is a cliff dwelling, you know, and you can't climb up to it. You kind of are walking down below and sort of the valley below, and you can look up, and on the side of the hill slope there's this really amazing structure. It does have that vibe of Mesa Verde, right? The classic cliff dwellings, the cliff palaces, all that kind of stuff. It's a bit smaller, but it still totally counts. It's really, really cool. And it's going to be of the same general time period as Wupaki, give or take. But that is a great place to visit if you're in Sedona and you're like, I can't take the new age crap anymore. I want to see something real, something like Montezuma's Castle. One thing, I'm usually a fan of just not changing the names of stuff. Like as soon as the name's done, you're like, okay, that's cool. The name's stuck. Let's let it roll. But I would change the name of Montezuma's Castle. And the next one we're going to talk about in a minute, Montezuma's Well, because the reason these things got the name Montezuma was they're originally going to be named like 100 years ago. And at that time, that's when you have all these crazy pseudo archaeological theories of like, oh, these are like Montezuma's people who built these things, which has nothing to do with reality, right? So the first handful of people to see it slap on this name that relates to central Mexico and has nothing to do with the Sinagua or the American Southwest or anything, and then the name sticks. I would change it just because it's confusing. You know, I find it confusing even to this day. I'm like, wait, Montezuma's Castle, wait, isn't that in? Oh, no. Oh, right. It's in Arizona. Montezuma was never in Arizona, right? But little stuff like that, names matter, man. If you go see Montezuma's Castle, it doesn't take too long. You basically walk to outside of your car and you're at the bottom of this valley and you look up on the side and you go, wow, that's cool. And then there's a little interpretive center and stuff. There's a couple little interpretive signs to check you out. And you kind of have your little moment and you're like, wow, this is pretty neat. So Montezuma's Castle. And the last one of the three that we visited was Montezuma's Well. Now, Montezuma's Well is a cenote. So, of course, me being the cenote guy, I was like, I got to check this out. And that I thought was very cool because Montezuma's Well and all the Maya cenotes and stuff, geologically, they're the same thing. A hole falls through limestone and is filled with groundwater, right? Same idea. And on top of it, so Montezuma's Well has an outlet of water. So the water always kind of flows out. It's basically a natural spring. in that way, or it's a place where the groundwater can kind of seep out. And so it's been used forever and ever and ever as a source of water, but they also have structures around the side too. And I thought that was really great because I'm so into looking at like water shrines and this kind of stuff, any kind of structures that we find on the edge of the ancient Maya cenotes. What are those like? Are there any like architectural motifs that can point towards, oh, this is a shrine versus not? Very hard to say, but what I will say is it has, Montezuma's Well has like these little rooms on the edge. It's like this combo of cliff dwelling, but on the side of the cenote. So the buildings are much smaller than at like Montezuma's Castle or something. And some of them you can kind of walk right up to. There's a handful of little rooms. Really, really neat. Again, what these rooms were specifically used for and this kind of stuff, I would be shocked if there wasn't some sort of ritual aspect to them. They are of the time. And to me, that in some ways, going to Montezuma's Well gave me more of a Maya vibe than going to the quote unquote ball court at Wupatki. So just kind of interesting. And all three of those, I highly recommend checking those out because it's just a really interesting view into the Sinagua cultures of the kind of early thousands AD, when we return. My final thoughts on Sedona, Arizona. Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudo Archaeology Podcast, episode 158. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, for our third of 3-part series, otherwise known as just 3 parts to this one podcast episode on Sedona, Arizona. And I thought I would end up just talking about sort of the new age phenomenon in Sedona in general. And like, is it harmful? Is it not? Is it somewhere in between? What's the deal with new age? What is new age? Just talking about it, I realize I should probably do an entire podcast just on what is quote unquote new age, because I think it's so vague that it can mean different things to different people. Like when I think of new age, I think of kind of post 1960s, right? You kind of have the flower power generation, the hippie generation, and you get this from that. This grows from that sort of hippie, anti-government, we're going to do our own thing, man. Alienation. That's where this comes from. And, in the first part, we talked about my just experiences where I come to Sedona and new age just slaps me in the face, and there's vortices and there's like robbed artifacts, which are obviously terrible. But then we talk about like the really cool real archaeology that's in the area. But then I'd wrap up like, okay, how do I feel about all this? Before I go onward, I just want to recommend a little video that I've shown my students for years, and it's called White Shamans and Plastic Medicine Men. You can probably find it on YouTube pretty easy. I don't think I will put the link in the description because links like that tend to burn out and go bad, and then it'll be somewhere else. So you're much better off just Google White Shamans and Plastic Medicine Men. It's a little documentary. It's only like half an hour long. It came out in 1996, I believe, give or take. But it's one of those like low cost documentaries where somebody was obviously passionate about this and just made very simple, one camera, did a couple interviews documentary. And it's real about, how this new age philosophy, this post 1960s, quote unquote, I'm using quote unquote a lot, quote unquote spiritual movement affects real native peoples, right? And I have thought back and forth about this 100 times. It's like in certain ways, it's obviously harmful because it's so ignorant, right? That's probably my biggest beef with the new age aspect of things. It's just ignorant. It cherry picks little bits and pieces of various native cultures, half the time, the people doing this will be pretendians, right? People who aren't really native, but they say they are. And it can also be just sort of this scam where they put this stuff together and they get people to pay them to go on some spiritual journey. That's really just a mishmash of sort of, again, what I would almost call the pretendian movement, where it's just this pastiche of like every native cliche. Oh, hey, there's a teepee and a powwow, right? That kind of crap. Now, teepees are fine if you're in like the middle of the country where teepees belong and where teepees are native, but not in Sedona. Teepees are not from there, right? That's not like historically correct. Also, the sort of powwow, the idea of the powwow. Now, you'll see these a lot, even in many native tribes, but the idea of the powwow comes from rodeo culture. It's basically a mix of kind of just native peoples getting together in a rodeo situation. So it's not the idea of a modern powwow has very little to do with what the Sinagua people would be doing in like 1200 AD. You know, it doesn't make a powwow a bad thing, but at all. But to sell it as somehow of the Sinagua, no. It's just a modern gathering where, where you may be able to like buy native jewelry or this kind of thing. And people have like cookouts and stuff. And real native people will go to these too, just to hang and have fun. But the ignorance though does, sneak in. Haven't you ever noticed that sort of new age practitioners, they'll give themselves a native name, and it's always this over the top native name. It'll be like my real name is Andrew, but I don't call myself that anymore. I am Great Eagle Spirit, right? It's always some over the top, I am all knowing coyote. If you know the real native world at all, you know that native people don't call themselves that. Again, I'm laughing because it's like they don't. If they have an actual native name like that, it's something that's personal, and they usually don't share, and they usually keep it to themselves. And it'll be like something much more of the everyday. Like it'll be like rabbit lays down, or something like that. You know what I mean? It almost never will have hawk or spirit or coyote or buffalo or some big animal, It's much more of the everyday. Another thing that drives me nuts is the whole idea of the sweat bath. Now, many cultures do the sweat bath thing. Okay, that's almost a worldwide phenomenon of different times and places. The ancient Maya do the sweat bath thing, but in the new age world, they'll go on a sweat bath journey where, Great Eagle Spirit will take you to their sweat house. And it's like, whatever. A real sweat is not comfortable. Like a real sweat house is super hot, super dark. You go in there and you click up to a higher plane of existence, but you think heavy thoughts, you deal with yourself, and it is uncomfortable, right? So it's not this like cheesy, breezy new age crap that they shill these days. So it's funny, as I talk about this, I'm like, yeah, it is kind of harmful to native beliefs. I will say that modern native people just eye roll this and just go, okay, whatever, dude. You go on with your bad self, right? That's how they feel about this. They just think it's lame. And they laugh at it. I think there's a quote in White Shamans and Plastic Medicine Men where one of the guys is like, we tolerate you and we laugh at you. And that is exactly my experience of how native people feel about this crap, right? It's just not real. It's not native. It's absolutely inauthentic. But so why do people do this? Because, hey, man, Sedona, Arizona is doing well with tourism and New Age. And I'm sure they are doing just fine in terms of selling crystals. Why do people do this? What do I think? Because that's what really matters. People are lonely. That's why they're doing this, man. They're lonely as hell. We have just a pandemic of loneliness, and the lonely factor is just getting worse in our country. So my guess, I have not even looked at this, you guys. My guess is all that New Age stuff is growing. I would think it's just it's exploding would be my guess, because loneliness is exploding. So that aspect of it is where I give them a pass sometimes. You know, I'm like, well, you want to get together and call yourself Great Eagle Spirit and do some fake sweat thing. Well, you know what? Okay. Because at least, even though it's fake, it's like bringing people together. At least they're making friends that aren't online. So, you know, that's, what can I say? Like I would rather that than people just stay lonely by themselves and just try and make fake friends online. You know, so that's okay. And I think with the loneliness, people, it's like a 1-2 punch. People are searching for connection because they're lonely, and they're searching for meaning because so many things are just like thin and meaningless. You know, we don't have participation in your classic religions nearly as much anymore. And I'm telling you, this is coming from an atheist. You know, but that group cohesion, that idea of a small town with a church where everyone goes and has that sense of community and helps each other, we're dying for that. So that's where this whole New Age thing really comes in and gets a hold. You know, this is why you find people moving to Sedona and they're sitting there in their yoga position with that weird smile on their face, like in the vortex where you wish they weren't there because you just want to take a photo. But that's what they're doing. You know, they're getting this funky pseudo meaning. And isn't that ultimately kind of sad though? Wouldn't it be so much better if we could just turn the dial half a step and get them to go to those local archaeological sites, get real meaning out of real things like those archaeological sites or any other place, as long as it's real, and find meaning in their lives. Maybe just go out and say hi to your neighbor. It's that simple, you know, knock on your neighbor's door and just say hi, intro yourself, because they're lonely too. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Pseudo Archaeology Podcast. Please like and subscribe wherever you like and subscribe. And if you have questions for me, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, feel free to reach out using the links below or go to my YouTube channel, Kinkella Teaches Archaeology. See you guys next time.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.